And so Connie Rice, I want to go to you with the first question, because that verdict may have been the spark that triggered the LA uprising, but the causes were deep-rooted and long-standing. So can you talk to us about the situation facing Black Angelenos 30 years ago that led to our understanding of this population and the issues facing them? Yeah, we're having a hard time unmuting ourselves.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
There we go.
Oh, Monica, it's so good to see everybody. And yes, at the kindling that verdict lit had been building for generations. And I think when we talk about Black LA, we have to talk about which Black LA. And I think that for working class African Americans and underclass, very poor African Americans, Los Angeles in the 80s and the 90s, and so even going back to 1965, when we had the first uprisings and rebellions against abusive policing, that kindling had been building. And you remember the McCone Commission, that autopsy on that riot said that you have to do two things. You have to end the spiral of despair, the conditions of deprivation and lack of opportunity, lack of resources, and you have to end the brutal, cruel, racist policing. Fast forward to 1991, what had we done in the meantime? For working class and poor African America, they had seen 80,000 jobs leave the South Central area. All the manufacturing base of the community left. There wasn't even a blue ribbon committee formed. The paper covered very little. The mainstream and dominant media didn't cover it very much. It was covered somewhat in the African American paper, the Sentinel, the Los Angeles Sentinel. But when your entire economic base and job base leaves, you're going to have a real gap there, and people fell through the cracks. You had an emerging and sort of burgeoning gang culture. And of course, the dominant media covered most of Black LA as deprivation and violence, because that's what the elite communities feared. It was done through the eyes of the subscriber base, which is natural. But for the dominant media, the focus on these communities didn't talk about what they were facing. We were focused on building skyscrapers downtown. We weren't focused on building communities and building families and reinvesting in the infrastructure that created the upward mobility. At the same time that African Americans and very poor African Americans who never had any stake and never any place at the table of prosperity in LA, they were having an influx of lots of immigrants. Latinos, there was a time of transition, it was a time of turmoil, and it was a time of not having, the city did nothing to help these populations learn to live together as opposed to being pit against each other. So I think that what the city of Los Angeles did, these were communities and these were people who did not matter. And the only time that they were covered in the dominant media, which was just a few organs, we didn't have 500 channels back then, was through the lens of what the mainstream elite feared about those communities. They didn't understand, didn't know, and didn't have a connection to. And poor African Americans would come to me and say, we're not sharing our crumbs. These, we were here first, and these people are coming in with resources we don't have. And Karen Bass and Stuart Quo and Connie Rice and Angela O, we were trying to create civic glue so that we could bridge the differences and make the pie bigger. But I think that the media didn't cover that context. They didn't cover the failure to address the policing. It didn't cover the failure to provide the economic infrastructure. And I think, Monica, what we ended up with was kindling, building and building and building, abuse after abuse, beating after beating. The police were really stoking, they were the lighter fluid. And that when those acquittals came down, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. I picked up the phone and I called my staff and I said, get your kids, go home. The city is going to burn. And when it burned, the Korean American and Korean immigrant community took the brunt of it, over $1 billion. And instead, what the media, mainstream media, focused on was the 1% of the shops who had owners who could defend themselves. And I think that there's been very little healing in the wake of it. And I don't think there's been very much interest from the media in any of those perspectives.